Awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I just wanted to thank everybody so much for joining the Illinois Environmental Council here for our Lunch and Learn series. Our hope all along has been that this series will be something that connects our community and keeps us all informed. And just a little bit about our organization. Since our founding in 1975 by a group of really dedicated grassroots environmentalists, IEC has led issue advocacy campaigns by allowing environmental organizations to pool their resources and create a higher profile for environmental issues in the state. So today, IEC represents more than 100 environmental and community organizations operating in the state of Illinois. And if you're not a member of IEC and you're able to give, please consider joining today. We'll drop a link to that in the chat, but that's a really great way to continue building power for people in the environment, which is what we do at IEC. So my name is Tucker Berry. I am the communications director here at IEC. I've been with the organization since 2019, and I have a special place in my heart for the Lunch and Learn series. This is something that we really picked up in earnest at the very beginning of the pandemic, when I think folks were looking for ways to connect, and they were really popular. So we continue to do them. And then just a couple little housekeeping notes here at the top, what we found as a successful way of kind of doing these. Everybody, upon entry is muted, just so that it's easy for everybody to hear the speaker. But we will have time at the end for a Q&A session. And so you can put your questions throughout the presentation in the chat. I'll kind of keep tabs on those and direct them to our guest speaker today. But you'll also have the opportunity to go ahead and raise your hand at the end and ask questions verbally if you would like. And at that time, our moderator Paloma, who's also on our team here at IEC, can help with muting and unmuting so that you can go ahead and ask your question. So I think without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Alex Boutros from Chicago Votes. She's our speaker today. She'll be talking about a bill that we are super excited about supporting here at IEC. It's an important part of how we understand the intersectional nature of environmental issues and how to be allies to folks in our community who, experience the most harmful impacts of the climate crisis, right? First and worst. And that's, of course, communities of color, low-income communities, working class communities all across the state. And so, yeah, she'll be talking about this bill. So, Alex, I'll go ahead and pass it to you, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then get into your presentation.
Thank you so much, Tucker. Thank you, Paloma. Thank you to the Illinois Environmental Council. My name's Alex. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Chicago Votes. I just want to give a big thank you to IEC for honestly just being one of the biggest supporters, especially down in Springfield, of Chicago Votes in just so many ways. They give us support. And so we're just so extremely grateful. And I wanted to start us off today repeating the rally speech that I was able to give at IEC's rally for folks that potentially weren't there. I think it really just kind of hones in why this partnership makes sense and where this intersection really lies. Sorry, I do have a bit of a stuffy nose, so please don't mind that. So in the US, the largest form of voter suppression is taking away the right to vote for people with a felony. That's called felony disenfranchisement. Currently in Illinois, you lose your right to vote while serving a conviction in a correctional institution. That right to vote is restored once you are released, right? And so in pretrial detention, people in jail that are waiting for trial, they have the right to vote. Once you get out of prison, after serving that sentence, you have the right to vote. But while you are in the correctional institution serving that sentence, you are disenfranchised. So at Chicago Votes, we believe that democracy works best when more people are involved, right? We are not scared or feel fearful of more people voting. Senate Bill 828 will restore the right to vote for people that are in Illinois prisons or serving a conviction in a correctional institution 14 days post that conviction. And I will get into why that 14 days post conviction is so important. With roughly 30,000 people incarcerated in Illinois prisons, this bill is critical to ensuring that every Illinoisan has the ability to participate in democracy and the green economy. The green economy includes ensuring access to clean water and being able to hold elected officials accountable for the current contaminated water in our Illinois prisons due to an infrastructure crisis that has been ignored for decades. 90% of people in prison will return to their communities, right? Not every person has a life sentence or 400 years. So civic engagement and ties to the community have been shown to reduce recidivism so they don't go back to prison and improve rehabilitation outcomes. Because when people feel heard, when people feel represented and connected to their communities, our democracy flourishes and our environmental protections can be more easily reached. And so that is really the main intersection of why we are so grateful that Illinois Environmental Council does see the importance of our collaboration, right? If we are both succeeding, we are getting closer to these environmental protections that we so desperately need, right? And Chicago Votes, for those that don't know, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that specifically is by young people for young people, because young people are the ones we have to deal and live in this world. And we need environmental protections so that we can live in this world and still be able to enjoy it for what it is, right? And so that is kind of the premise. And before I really dive into felony disenfranchisement and why it's so important that we address it, especially in Illinois, I wanted to open it up to any folks that are on this call right now that see how IEC and this topic of restoring the right to vote for people in prison is linked. You could put it in the chat, you could unmute yourself, but I just wanted to open it up to folks to see if folks have other thoughts already.
Would love to hear from folks, especially anybody who maybe joined us for Lobby Day just a couple weeks ago. Any experiences they had with lobbying on this bill or at the rally, and becoming more familiar with this issue, especially as it relates to environmental stuff. Yeah.
No pressure. But I just want people to think about it, right? And if you do think about something, feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand, and would love to bring other folks' voices into this. But I will jump into this, into some of these slides that I have for y'all today. So Senate Bill 828 is voting in prison, right? SB 828 is sponsored in the House by Representative LaShawn Ford and in the Senate by Senator Simmons and Senator Robert Peters, and many other senators, including Senator Johnson, are co-sponsors on this bill. We're very appreciative because this bill hasn't even made it actually to the Senate yet. This past October, Senate Bill 828 was brought to a floor vote in the Illinois House, where it received 57 of the 60 needed votes to be passed through the Senate to the Senate for consideration. So we were 3 votes away from the 60 that we needed. So not receiving those needed votes, Representative Ford postponed this bill, meaning we get a second chance this year to bring it back to the floor of the House to get it passed and off to the Senate. So I'm going to go into why removing felony disenfranchisement laws is crucial to a fair democracy. When we have mass incarceration and we have mass convictions, that plus felony disenfranchisement laws equals a constrained democracy, right? So when we reduce the number of people that can vote, that impedes representation of these individuals in their communities, and that increases racial disparities in voting and representation. In effect, it puts democracy and representation on lockdown. And before I go any further, I do want to mention that these slides and this research was created by Dr. Christina Rivers from DePaul University, who is so brilliant. So Who is in prison, right? And why is this such an issue? This felony disenfranchisement issue was not addressed in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And as you can see, in the 60s, the incarceration levels were very different than they are now. They were still very high, but due to the war on drugs and the war on crime in the 80s and 90s, we see a steep increase of over 1.5 really million people that are incarcerated. So felony disenfranchisement becomes a whole different level of issues with how many people we are incarcerating. Plus, what is the racial disparity of those people that we are incarcerating on a very high level? They're mostly Black, right? In Illinois, 55% of our incarcerated population is Black, but they only make up 14% of our Illinois actual population. So that racial disparity is very stark. That including a lot of Latine people, Native Hawaiian, American Indian. This is US overall. And the US holds 25% of the world's prison population. So we have a large issue with incarcerating a lot of people and then taking away their right to vote. Only 2 states in the US allow people in prison to vote. That's Maine and Vermont. DC also allows people in their federal prison to vote. And then Puerto Rican people in prison can also vote. But 2 state prisons. So Maine and Vermont, they've always allowed people in prison to vote. It's always been in their constitution. They didn't ever restore that right. So that would be the difference for Illinois. We are restoring that right to a little over 30,000 individuals actually in our Department of Corrections. So why, again, does all of this matter? We put a lot of people in prison and we take their right to vote away. And a lot of those folks are Black and brown. A lot of this data on this slide, I don't really need to go into it. It's really things that I've already said about racial disparities, right? 54% of the IDOC population, but 15% of the state population at the bottom. And we have to understand that crime rates are not disproportionate by race. Like we talk about cannabis use is not as disproportionate in the use of it as the arrests are, right? Arrest, conviction, and incarceration rates are very disproportionate, whereas the actual crime rate is not disproportionate. So these disparities that we see in our criminal legal system and these felony disenfranchisement laws, again, I will say it again, create a form of voter suppression. And there is so much evidence that recidivism decreases when people that are incarcerated feel a sense of full citizenship and political belonging. Voting matters. We all know here that voting matters and it's so important, but it matters so much more, especially at the local level and in competitive elections, right? People who are in prison and serving a conviction, they are the most directly impacted by judicial elections, right? Because it is a judge that chose that sentence, that gives them that sentence, puts them in prison, and that person in prison has no accountability measure over that judge who could have given them a very unjust sentence. And we know that people that are currently and formerly incarcerated are interested in voting, right? There is a narrative that goes around that says, oh, well, people in prison don't want to vote. People in jail, they don't care about anything. They care so much. They care probably more than most people actually on the outside. When we at Chicago Votes, we passed a law in 2019 to make Cook County Jail a polling location. So we actually saw that voting inside Cook County Jail went from like 4% to like 40% when it became a polling location. So that access and that voter education is huge and is so, so important. With Dr. Christina Rivers, we conducted a survey of people in Stateville Prison. And it basically came out to say that many of them, of people in Stateville Prison, had voted prior to incarceration or while in jail. Many would vote while they were incarcerated if they had an option. Many would vote when they're released. Many think it's very important. Many think voter education courses should be given as well. We definitely can share these slides as well for folks. Does this bill allow people to vote while on supervised release? People already can vote actually on supervised release, right? Mandatory supervised release, MSR, is after they get out of prison. So they already have the right to vote currently, right now. 90% would say they would take a voter education course, and then 93% said that they were very or somewhat closely followed the 2016 presidential campaign. When I talk to so many people that I know that have gotten out of prison and that are currently in prison, I mean, they follow the presidential election. They get so many different news channels that they're constantly streaming. I mean, they are extremely educated about what's going on, and they have so many political debates constantly regarding these different issues. And what's missing is their actual right to vote and share that opinion. And so we see here that 37%, only 37% knew what their voter eligibility was post-release, or what that process was to regain that right to vote. So we see here that voter education, it really comes down to that. People need to know their rights. They need to know what the process is, and they need to know what resources are available to them. 93% is so high. Excuse me. This is a survey that was done in California. Excuse me. You can see the numbers here. They're just as high. Very similar. Sorry, the worst time to get a tickle in my throat. Okay. So we had said 14 days before. The reason that we said 14 days, excuse me, is because of the Illinois Constitution.
It's so fine, Alex. Take some time to recover there. Well, we have plenty of time to get through all this stuff.
Goodness. Thank you. So the Illinois Constitution, this is an excerpt from that exactly. It says that a person convicted of a felony or otherwise under sentence in a correctional institution or jail shall lose the right to vote, right? Okay, so we take just that first part. We understand that a person convicted of a felony or otherwise under sentence in a correctional institution or jail has to lose the right to vote at some point, okay? However, it's this next sentence that is so crucial. Which right shall be restored not later than upon completion of his sentence. So that not later than is where we and our lawyers at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights see wiggle room. Are there any questions about that? Are people on the same kind of understanding that not later than really gives us the understanding that that right can be restored beforehand. Yep. How is this related to the 14 days thing? So we are saying that when someone is convicted, they lose their right to vote for 14 days. Then that right to vote is restored after 14 days. So it complies with the first half of this, right? They lose their right to vote, which right shall be restored not later than 14 days post conviction is what is what the language of the bill actually says. Does that make sense to people? Do people understand that? Because this is one of the biggest pushback we've gotten about this bill is that it's not constitutional. So if everyone is on the same page with me here, I don't understand why there's so much pushback from so many lawmakers, right? Or different institutions that potentially don't really actually want to see people have their right to vote restored. And so if anyone's ever talking to you about this bill and they say that you have to have a constitutional amendment to give people in prison the right to vote, you can tell them that yes, they have to lose their right to vote for a period of time, but that right has to be restored. And it has to be not later than the completion of their sentence. And so we think it should be before. So this is how you can plug in and how you can help. You can email your lawmakers. Oh, thank you so much, Paloma. She put all these links in the chat. So you can email your lawmakers. It's just one click. It's a pre-written email, sends it to your representative and your senator. You can join our advocacy evenings every Tuesday night at 4:15 p.m. We have volunteers calling, tweeting, emailing lawmakers. And we will be in Springfield and virtual next Wednesday, the 9th, where we will be having folks join us virtually 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. to call, tweet, make noise so that our in-person lobby day later that day can be supplemented, right? Because lawmakers do see our emails, they do see our tweets, they do get our calls, even though we might not get a response, but they do see it. And so we need to be down there because we need to have the physical presence. I will say that we're pretty full up on our in-person lobby day. So we do need people to join us virtually that morning. So if you are available, please register. You can stay for as long as you want. But I will say also that it has been made very clear to us that the legislature is very scared right now about re-election and currently this current election and doing anything around criminal justice reform, right? And we've been told by a lot of lawmakers, specifically, we need moderate Democrats to help pass this bill and get it across the finish line. They are much more likely to pass this off the House floor in veto session after the election in November, right? And so that a realistic timeline of when this bill could pass the House floor. That doesn't mean we're not going to stop making noise. By any means, we will email, we will call, we will be down there. And we need y'all as well. So I will stop there for now and see if there's any questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, folks, you can post your questions in the chat, but also like, yeah, if you have thoughts or sort of just like reflections or a question that you want to, that is maybe, sometimes questions are just easier to express vocally than to try to like figure out how to type it all out. So you can use the raise your hand function, which I think is, if you click the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom app, it'll open up a panel of different things you can do there, some emojis, which are great. But yeah, you can raise your hand there and then it'll let us know that you have a question or a comment.
And I just apologize again for having this uncontrollable cough right now.
Yeah, nothing you can do about that when that happens. You just have to ride it out, and it's awful.
Are there any thoughts or questions? I would also really love to hear from folks that have joined this call. Why did you join this call? What brought you and your interest to learning about this specific bill? Because it is separate from the usual IEC platform.
Yeah, I'm super interested in that too. So I guess about 2 years ago, we revitalized our like big multi-issue platform document, like right, like all the different issues that we take positions on and where we stand on it. And we added for the first time this like sort of robust analysis about how like what's our responsibility as an organization that has been growing power in the state and in like arenas of policy change. What's our responsibility to the communities who are most impacted by policies that we either choose to support or have otherwise historically been silent on. And so for us, this one, for all the reasons that Alex articulated at the very beginning of this presentation, yeah, fits squarely within that. But I know, right, that we have a lot of work to do just even within our own environmental community in Illinois in terms of like bringing folks along on that journey and understanding why a bill like this is relevant to our issues and is in a way, right, like an environmental issue. So let's see, it looks like we have somebody who's raised their hand. Let me see if I can get it to show me who that is. Yeah, Laura. Yeah, do you have a question or a comment?
Well, kind of more of a comment, I suppose. I did on lobby day did talk with a Republican legislator about this issue, and I've worked for several years on criminal justice issues, and I know that there's definitely a strong bias in incarcerating people of color. And when I chatted with this person, I said, when people are punished and incarcerated, what they lose is their freedom, and they lose the ability to be with their families and the things they want to do, but they don't become a non-citizen. But his feeling was that, well, they did something really wrong, so they shouldn't be able to vote. I just thought it was a very interesting reaction. So it's just a comment.
It's a very interesting reaction. And something to think about is that Illinois has one of the highest exoneration rates in the country, meaning we have very notably incarcerated one of the highest rates of people that are innocent. And that is just the folks that we have given exonerations, knowing that there are likely many more people that are actually innocent behind bars that we have incarcerated.
Interesting. Is that one of the main, it sounded like the, quote unquote unconstitutional argument is like one of the main detracting arguments that you guys have been hearing and promoting this bill, but is that question that Laura just raised one of the more common things that you hear? I would guess so.
I think when lawmakers or different people get past the constitutional piece of it, it really just comes down to the in principle they believe that someone has done something wrong and that taking away their right to vote is part of their punishment. And even Representative Vela told me the other day when I was in Springfield, I sat down and talked with him about it, and he kind of kept going a little bit back and forth on his thoughts because, he was saying, he believes in it in many ways. But then he kind of goes to the extremes, which I think many lawmakers or people do, is they go to the extremes of what about the child rapist, or what about the person with 3 homicides? Like, they go to these extremes to justify taking the right to vote away from 30,000 people, right? Why are you going to these extremes? And it is understandable, firstly, that taking the right to vote or giving this bill would not actually release anyone from prison, which is something we have to remember. Even though that is a different conversation we can have, but we have to understand that many of these people will get out of prison eventually, and we want to tie them to their community so that they feel that accountability, they feel that community responsibility. So yes, Tucker and Laura, that is definitely a question that we get, is, I just believe that it's part of the punishment when it isn't actually part of the punishment. It's not written in any conviction or sentencing, right? It's the number of years that you are given, you are put behind bars, right? That is your punishment. Being taken away from your family, that should be punishment enough. Taking your right to vote away is just voter suppression and disenfranchisement of Black and brown people and many low income white people as well. Jen, yeah, so at the kind of the beginning of this presentation, I linked the 2 issues. So people who are incarcerated, they are still and should have access to the green economy, right? The green economy includes access to clean water. And unfortunately, many of our prisons have very contaminated water. It's coming out yellow, it's coming out brown. And this is due to infrastructure issues that have been ignored. And so clean water is one of really the biggest issues that we see, that people in prison don't have the access to hold their elected officials accountable to do something about that. Or really many of the other decisions that people in prison care about as well, about the environment, about having access to food that is healthy and won't deteriorate their health as well.
And I can add too, Alex, like, one of the things that struck me, and like, this is true, and I think, but it struck me when you were saying this earlier, is that, it's not a coincidence that like the populations most impacted by this bill and by mass incarceration are the same, or really, right, there's like a significant overlap between those communities and environmental justice communities who are so directly impacted by the environmental laws that we either, right, like our legislature or local governments either choose to pass or choose not to pass. And so by like just taking all of those voters, right, like right off the board, it really paves the way. It makes it a lot easier, right, or a lot harder to hold like polluters accountable, for example, right, or to continue expanding democratic participation in other ways that are consistent with what we know we need to do in order to secure better environmental justice protections, like transparency, like community participation in determining like, right, like literally which polluters can move into a neighborhood or not, just like we're trying to do in like the EJ Act that we're working on this session as well with the Chicago Environmental Justice Network, and they've been taking the lead on that. So, in that way, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why this is like sort of in a high level conceptual way of like that they're connected, but in a really practical way, in the way that like, is like directly impacting the lived experience of people both who are incarcerated and coming from those communities, and the people who are still living in them and are not incarcerated. Such a good question though, because I think like, there are a lot of issues that are a lot like this that I think IEC is working to kind of like flesh those things out and take a more expanded look at what is an environmental issue. Go ahead, Jen.
I appreciate that answer, guys.
Sure.
It's something I watched the presentation, like, and I just missed the beginning, and I was trying to connect the dots, like, and it makes a lot more sense. And I'm actually really glad that you guys are putting a focus on this. I did have that second follow-up question though, like, does this mean like all voters, like even like the child molesters, like they get their votes? Does that also mean that?
Yeah. This would reenfranchise everyone in prison. And I will reiterate that this bill is not shortening anyone's sentence, right?
Yeah.
This bill is not letting someone out of prison. It is giving them the access to vote, right? Making sure that they have that connection to community, which when you don't have that connection to community and you are taken so far away, you're more likely to harm your community. You're more likely to do something bad to your community because you are so disconnected from it. You don't feel
Such a
that
good point.
connection and responsibility, you know? And then I will also say, if anyone, talking about criminal justice reform, often it is brought up rapists and murderers, but I do want to address the rapists part that unfortunately people who do sexually assault another person often are not put in prison. They are not held accountable. They are unfortunately in many of our halls of power, right? Unfortunately, they are on many of our college campuses, right? As someone who has been sexually assaulted, I know that that person will never be held accountable or be put in prison. That's not where I'll find them, unfortunately. So that is, it's more of a fear-mongering term that is told to people, rapists and murderers. Unfortunately, it is so much more nuanced than that. I think it's less than 1% of people who sexually assault or rape another person actually are put in prison for it. And then when we talk about murder, that is a very, very nuanced topic that we really have to dig into and understand, because it's not, someone doesn't murder someone standalone on its own, right? There are always root causes. There's always a reason why that someone led to that, right? So we have to understand those root causes first, before we can actually understand how to prevent it in the future. And I think voting will always just help. I think voting is a good thing, right? And it's one vote that can do so much for somebody's.
Yeah, we can't be scared of giving people the right to vote. That, that just can't be, that's never going to be a solution to any of our problems. That's only going to lead to more problems. And yeah, Kate, I think you make like a great point here. The logic behind using the type of crime or level of a crime to determine whether or not someone votes kind of falls apart when we look at the fact that the racial disparity, right, among incarceration. So it's like when crime rates are like committed at the same sort of basic same levels, right? I think you were kind of saying that, Alex. So it's like people are being like Black and brown communities are being punished for these crimes. Other communities aren't. And it's just not fair that then only the people who get punished, which are disproportionately so, are the ones that lose the right to vote. It is, like you were saying, just another way of suppressing communities of color's ability to participate in democracy. So I feel like, yeah, the logic there kind of, it falls apart.
And I appreciate you, Jen, really uplifting these questions because you are so not alone in these questions.
Yeah, such a great discussion. Really, really appreciate everybody. Yeah, any other sort of thoughts or comments here, questions about, how you can get involved, how you can help, where this fight goes next, even questions about, what is, like, it could be as simple as like, oh, okay, Alex, you mentioned veto session. What does that mean? When is that happening? Like that kind of stuff. All that's on the board, and I think we have plenty of time here to address any of those like final thoughts or questions. All right.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad that folks are here to listen, and I hope folks have really gotten excited about this topic, and the intersection that it has with environmental IEC.
Same here. And we so appreciate you, Alex, and Chicago Votes. We love you guys over there. And like, this has been like a really fun collaboration. And yeah, we're gonna keep fighting with you guys to get this one all the way across the finish line. I think Paloma put some more information about, again, just those links that you might want to have handy for how to participate, how to help. Yeah, and look, if you're not a member of IEC, I'd encourage you to join. That's the kind of planned donations and support that help us continue to do not just programs like this, but all the rest of the environmental work that we do on all the many issues that impact communities and our environment and the folks all across the state who rely on a healthy environment, right? And that's everybody, that's all of us. So including folks in prison. So yeah, please join if you can. And yeah, look, Alex put her email address there in the chat. I am happy to do the same. If you'd like to get in touch with me about any of this or any of our other areas of our work. And yeah, thank you, Paloma, for running tech. And just appreciate everybody for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to the space.
Fantastic. All right, folks, have a great day.
Have a great day.